Happy Monday, guys. After a huge day, it's me, Melissa, from Rising Strong Counselling and Training Services. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to get this video up tonight. I know it's late. I'm recording this late, so please forgive me. My day has managed to bunch up and just explode with things going on, which just shows you that the most organised person in the whole wide world can sometimes get tripped up on the small things. So tonight I wanted to present to you about grief and loss. So grief, loss and bereavement. So grief work is some of the hardest work I do, and it's amazing how many people come and seek help about grief. And it can be grief about a death, or it could be grief about a life change. So it could be something about career having to change. It can be a change in finances. It can be a change in family situation, a divorce, losing a child, custody agreements, that sort of thing. So grief work happens when we're going through a life change that affects us, and it's something that affects our heart, and sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense to people, and that's why people come and seek help about it. Now, this sort of work I started doing in palliative care years ago, so I was spending time with people after they'd had a diagnosis and following them through right through to end of life. And then prior to that, I'd actually worked in chronic illness and after that as well. So I've seen a lot of grief and bereavement associated with life and beginnings and endings of life, but also grief around expectancy of life, and what we expected in life sometimes wasn't what we always got. So again, it was about adjustment to change and perhaps expectation. I think some of those things are some of the biggest things that we can face. As a human, we expect to have all these things, and sometimes we have to adjust our expectation to not actually having them. Sometimes it could be about someone growing up in a rich family who might end up having nothing when they grow up and get older. So it can be something as simple as adjusting lifestyle. So grief and bereavement is, or grief and loss, grief, loss and bereavement. So let's just say grief work is one of those things that can form and take shape very differently from one person to the next. But tonight I wanted to speak to you about some basics to try and get you to understand how grief work is being tackled in the counselling situation, but also give you a bit of a platform for you to understand about what actually happens when someone's grieving. And when I say grieving, guys, let's just say from now on in, I'm talking about some sort of life change or loss. So here it is, and you guys might know, especially if you're a client of mine, I love working on a whiteboard, and I'm always scribbling on the whiteboard. So here it is, guys. Here is the dual process model. The dual process model is one of the models I like to use when I'm talking about grief work, and mainly because it's very simplistic and it shows people the difference between grief work that we do and the reconstructive work that we do once we've suffered a loss or we're experiencing grief. So this is very easy because it breaks the work into two sort of areas. One is the grief work, so whatever the feelings that go along with the grief that we're suffering. So here I've written things like fear, anxiety, the what now, the why me, the fears, the pains, the tantrums, all those things that happen to you once you've suffered a change in life or the loss of someone that you love. That's the stuff that happens in the grief work. When I talk about reconstructive work, it's the stuff where we get on with things. It's the things that we get back to life the way that we have known it prior to our life change. So just to make it really simplistic, I've put things like back to work, going back to our friendship groups, exploring ourselves in the here and now without the fear and the anxiety, and also here going back to our personal growth and perhaps even our personal hygiene, walking the dog, cleaning a house, those sorts of things. So that would be the reconstructive work versus the grief work of the yucky stuff, the heart stuff that happens when we're suffering from some sort of grief. Now, if you look at this picture, what you can see is there's a line going down the middle and it's sort of bouncing between one and the other. And if you can imagine that this is a timeline and something happens at this point in the timeline, and basically what it does is that particular thing that happened has forced us over to the grief work area. And basically what this shows is that in our journey of grief, we bounce between the grief work and the reconstructive work, and we sort of bounce back and forth, and there's no right path, there's no wrong path. Some people might spend a long time over in the grief work area, some people might bounce back and forward. And that's probably one of the hardest things about when we're grieving, is there's no roadmap as to how it's supposed to be or how we can stabilize. So sometimes you might hear people say that they feel like they're free falling or they're floating and they're not really sure, or that sort of thing. So when we talk about this dual process model, it actually shows you the reason why people get so anxious and scared when we talk about grief work. So it actually is an oscillation between grief work and reconstructive work. And it can go on for an insurmountable amount of time. There's no timeline that actually says, okay, it's going to take 6 months from this point down to this point, and that's that. Because for some people might be more resilient than others, whereas we could say, okay, you're going to go for a change in job and it's a major change in life and you're suffering grief because you're taking a pay cut. Some people might handle that really well and work down this timeline and be relatively adapted, and they might spend lots of time in this reconstructive area, but they also do spend some time in that grief area as well, and that grief work. But it's up to the individual. So it depends on the person, their resilience, and what type of grief and loss they're suffering as to how this will work. And this changes. This is a landscape that changes constantly depending on what the person has suffered. This is amazing work to do, guys, and it's one of my favourite places to sit when I spend time with clients, is if there is a major life change, for people to understand that there is grief associated with it, because we have to adjust our lives to consider the new things that are going on in our world and the loss of old things, old expectations and that sort of stuff. So it's really important, first of all, to understand, and I've got some points down here, and I'm glad I've got them because otherwise I'd just get lost. So, God, I love my whiteboard. Grief and reconstructing life after a grief or bereavement can happen. These things can happen simultaneously. So we might find that the grief work and the restorative work can happen at the same time. It just depends. So that's our first point for today. So important to understand that. Our second point is to validate people's feelings in this grief and bereavement work and the reconstructive work that they're doing. So as I said, it can be really confusing that when you suffer a loss, that we tend to oscillate between the two. So for 1 hour I might feel okay, and then the next hour that's coming up I might feel absolute rubbish because something has triggered something for me in my thought, and I'm now thinking back over here. So it's important for people that stand by us to validate that it's okay that sometimes 1 minute we're okay and the next minute we're not. And it's okay that sometimes we have a week of great and then a week of rubbish, because that's part of grief, bereavement and loss, especially in this model if we're taking into account this model. So validating people moving between these two parameters is really, really important. Marking moments with people, especially when they are suffering from a loss, depending on the loss, it could mean that we need to mark some moments. So I'll give you an example of this. When I've worked with people long-term on losing someone that they love dearly, sometimes we mark a moment by having a ceremony. So we might mark 1 month after death by having a small little speech, or we could have a small ceremony where we put that person's photo up on the table. We might still have dinner with that person. We might stick their photo up on the table, on the dinner table with us at night, and have a meal with them. So there's lots of ways that we can still mark moments with people if they're suffering from losing a significant other or a child, that sort of thing. Or if we want to mark a moment with someone, if someone loses a job under really poor circumstances, we might like to go and help them burn stuff around that job. So it could be that they've got the letter of employment there and they're really angry and they want to burn that. We can save that and help them mark the moment in a particular way. So it could be with a counsellor, it could be with a friend, it could be with a family, it could be with a partner, whoever it is. So marking moments with people is really important. So let's quickly go back through what we've got. The grief and reconstructive work that we do can happen simultaneously. Number 2, validating people's feelings, saying it's okay. And number 3, marking moments with people is just as important. Looking over here to number 4, there is no just getting over it. So say, for instance, if we had someone that had had a severe car accident when they were 15 years old, during that car accident, there was significant damage to someone, and it has caused them lifelong pain throughout their body. It's caused them to not regain full movement of their legs, to have a floppy arm, something like that. So when we look at that particular person, about them processing that particular situation, as time goes on in their life, they may grieve the loss of movement for different reasons. And it might be that if they can't walk, they might grieve the loss of not being able to walk when they're about to walk down the aisle and they can't walk down the aisle. So there's different reasons why it's important to say to people that it's okay and there is no time limit on grief. Grief is one of those things that we can't define. It's not fair to put parameters on because people grieve for different reasons at different life stages. So for me, if I've lost, I lost my sister when I was quite young. So for me, sometimes watching two sisters going to get a cup of coffee actually is really difficult for me. So sometimes I have to relive that grief. So at that stage, I'm in this reconstructive space again, and then slowly but surely I come back over to, the grief work, but slowly and surely I come back over to the reconstructive workspace again. So we visit different griefs and losses throughout our lives for different reasons, and it's about validating them and repositioning them in our lives to meaning make out of those losses. Okay, so just to recap, guys, if you do have any questions about this, you can pop them in the comments below in Facebook, or you can email me, or you can click the call now or contact me now on the Facebook, and we can have a chat a bit more about it. But lastly, the last thing that I've got here is we cannot heal people. We cannot take away the pain of the grief, loss and bereavement. We cannot make them better. We cannot say to them, I'm going to take that away from you. I'm going to take responsibility for that grief or loss. We can't do that. So it's so important that when we're talking about grief, loss and bereavement with people, that we understand that all we can do is just sit with people and explore what it is that's difficult about that for them in any given day. So if we look back and have just a really quick recap, and grief and loss is such a huge gamut of work that I do, that it's very difficult, I guess, to try and nail down some really good points for you guys, to make us semi-experts when we're talking to people about their grief. So here it is again, dual process model. We talk about the reconstructive work and the grief work working simultaneously. We talk about validating people's feelings by saying it's okay that it's confusing, it's okay that you're sad, it's okay for you to laugh. Even though you've had these losses, it's all okay, and there is no rule book on what they're actually going through. The third point was to mark moments with people, because it's important, again, to validate them and also allow them to do some meaning making in marking those moments. Number 4 was there is no getting over it, and it's not fair to put a time limit on grief, loss and bereavement for the reasons that I said before. And the 5th one is we cannot make it better for the people that we're listening to. So if we are listening to something hard, guys, sometimes it is really difficult to sit across from that and not say anything, not have to feel like we're going to fix it, but we can't fix it. So I hope that these little points have helped you guys tonight. I just find this such a great area in life. I think that if you're going through a life change, sometimes it is about the grief work that's really important to reposition this particular change in your life. And I really, really hope that if you're having trouble with a life change, that you come and seek some help. If it's from me or from one of my colleagues, we're really happy to help you adjust to life change as best as you can. So, guys, it's been so enjoyable catching up with you for this 5 or 10 minutes that I've been chatting to you. Apologies for being late. As you can tell, I'm probably had one of those days, and you can see it on my face, but I've been flat out all day. I'm very excited to be with you again for our 3rd week in a row. Things are busy here in Rising Strong. We've got lots of cool stuff happening at the moment. If you need anything at all, I'd love you to get in touch with me, have a chat to me. My name's Melissa. Info at risingstrong@gmail.com or melissa.risingstrong@gmail.com. You can get in touch with me on either of those particular emails. I'm really happy to answer questions, really happy for you to write them out in the comments below so other people can get an idea about some of the questions that are being asked. Guys, just remember that grief is such a big area. It's a huge area of expertise that sometimes some counsellors don't have that experience in grief and loss of, pets, marriages, people that we love, children, and custody battles and that sort of stuff. Some counsellors don't do that sort of work. Some of them work on other areas, but this is my area of expertise. So if you do need a hand, please come and see me. I actually had a great day today. I actually ran into one of my old clients from years ago, and I was counselling her little daughter when she was 5 years old, and I got to see this young lady. She was 10 years old, and her mum whispered, "Do you remember Melissa?" And she shook her head. And then about 2 minutes later, you could see on her face that she remembered me. And it was just after she'd lost her daddy. So, guys, this is a great area to work in. And over the years, I've found some amazing people, have had some amazing results. And please don't think there's a time frame on this stuff. It would be nothing worse than you trying to rev yourself up for a quick life change. And sometimes these things take time and effort to get through and get over. And I don't mean over full stop, I mean over for now until it's the next time that you have to attack this particular problem again, because you need to make meaning of it again when you're older or something triggers it. So guys, I'll catch you next week. Very exciting to see you again, and take care of yourselves for the week. Bye.